The next concept I want to teach you is about names. Names are really useful. When you're talking about someone else, it gets annoying to keep saying, hey, that guy over there, or the tall guy over there. Instead, we use their name. We say, Bob, that guy Bob, and it's useful. It's going to be the same thing with computing. When you do some complicated computation and you get some result, it can be useful to give it a name so you have something to refer to the result of that computation in the future. So let me show you how to do that in Python. The way you do that in Python is with an assignment statement. An assignment statement looks like this. You can tell it's an assignment statement because it's got an equal sign in there. And what this is doing is it's creating a new name and it's associating that name with a number. The name is hours per week. That's a name. It's created a name. And what this did was it computed a number. It computed 24 times 7. That's the number 168. And then it took that number at 168 and it assigned it to the name hours per week. So from now on, anytime we use the name hours per week, it'll be referring to the number 168. We don't need to recompute that number 168 again. Instead of something simple like 24 times 7, that might have been a much more complicated expression or computation that you wanted to remember and name. But in general, that's what an assignment statement looks like. There's an equal sign. To the left of it is a name. To the right of it is anything you could have typed into a cell and gotten a result. This whole thing is called a statement. A statement doesn't have a value. It doesn't have a result. It just performs an action. It associates the result of that expression with a name. The assignment statement changes the meaning of the name to the left of the equal symbol. So in the future, the meaning of that name will be 168. If that name already existed, it might have been associated with a different number, but now it's associated with 168. One thing that a lot of people find a little bit confusing about this is that might look like an equation. If you've taken some math, it might look like an equation, but don't think of it as an equation. It's not an equation. It's taking an action. After this action, the name hours per week is now bound to a particular number. I say it's not an equation because if something about the right-hand side changes, if the value of the expression on the right-hand side changes later, doesn't matter. The name hours per week is still going to refer to the same number it did before. It doesn't get reassociated with a new number. Okay, so that's the theory. Now let's see how it works. Here I've got a notebook, and I'm going to show you how to do some computation. All right, so let's multiply 24 times 7. That's the number of hours in a week. Good, 168. Now let's say I wanted to give it a name. Hours per week. Excellent. I now have a name created, and if I want to see what number is associated with that name, what the value of that name is, I can type it into a cell and then run the cell, and I'm going to run the cell, and you will see that the result is the number 168. It was assigned to 168 up here, and the 168 came from evaluating, running this code 24 times 7, and taking the result and associating that with the name hours per week. And now, anywhere in the future that I use the name hours per week, Python will replace that with the value 168. So if I wanted to compute the number of minutes in a week, I could multiply that by 60, and Python will give me the result. There's the number of minutes in a week, if for some reason I want to know that. Okay. Now, why do I use names? Well, one reason I use names is because sometimes I compute something and then I'm going to want to use it a bunch of times. So if I give it a name, then I have something to refer to it. I don't have to recalculate it in the future. But there's a second reason to use names that might not be so obvious, and that's as a way to help you understand and document your code so you can document what you're trying to do. All right, let's imagine I wanted to do something crazy, something a little more complicated. I'll pick a strange example, like instead of I want to compute the number of hours per week, I want to compute the number of seconds in a year. Strange example, but I can do that. I multiply out, and then I get some crazy expression like that. Okay, and there's the answer. There's 31,000 seconds in a year. Something, there's a bit of trivia for you. All right, fair enough. That all worked. But now I want you to imagine that I've made this notebook, and imagine myself coming back to this notebook sometime in the future, a week from now, a year from now, and looking at that expression. I might not be able to remember what I was trying to do there. Where did those numbers come from, and what was I trying to compute? So to help my future self remember what was going on here, it can be helpful to document right here in this notebook, in this web page, what I was trying to do. And there's two ways I can do that. One way is I can leave a little note to myself by writing some text. One of the great things about notebooks, and one of the reasons why we're having you use them, is they provide a way that you can put text in the middle of your code. You can add a document. So let's insert a cell up here, and I'm going to write a little note to myself. And if I change that to, instead of being code, change that to Markdown, that lets me write in here some text, anything I want. I could say, I'm calculating the number of seconds in a year. Boom. Now that's there for me in the future. In the future, if I come back to this, I'll see that note and I'll be able to reconstruct my reasoning and say, oh yeah, that's what I was trying to do. I bet I can figure out where those numbers came from. That's one way. The other way that many programmers use is they use names for this. If you choose a well-chosen name, you can give yourself a hint that'll help your future self reconstruct what the idea was and what was happening in this code, and make it easier to understand what the code is doing. So for instance, I could take this computation and I could give it a name. If I chose a good name like seconds per year, and then assign that to the name, now that's handy. I get the same result, 31,000. But if I ever have to come back to this notebook, I can see this name, seconds per year, and hopefully that'll give me a little reminder of what the meaning of this number is. It's not just a 31,000 out of context, but it gives me a little context. Okay, that's one way. Now, it still might be a little hard to reconstruct what's happening because look at all those numbers. Where did all those numbers come from? So sometimes if we want to really document a little more thoroughly, ideally what we do is we break down this computation into multiple steps. And we choose a name for the result of each of these steps. And that'll make it clearer to readers what's going on here, what we're trying to do and how we're doing it. So you might imagine that what I would do here is I compute the number of seconds per hour. I know how to do that. And then I can compute the number of hours per year. I know how to do that. And then if I multiply those two together, the result is the number of seconds per year. So let's just check that we got the same answer. You can see that the value of seconds per year is again 31,000. Now we computed it in this method that involved breaking it down into 3 steps, and we used a name to indicate what was happening in each of those steps, what each of those steps is computing. And by choosing the breakdown into steps and choosing names that help us figure out what each step was computing, then in the future, if I ever had to come back to this and take a look at the code and understand what it was doing, hopefully it'll be a lot clearer. This is really important. If I was going to come back to my code next year and I didn't do this, I might have no clue. Using names like this can help me reconstruct my reasoning. And I got to tell you, I'm pretty forgetful. So it might not be next year, it might be next week. By tomorrow even, maybe I've forgotten what was going through my mind today. And so this is a great help in making sure that I can understand in the future what my code was doing. All right, so that's names. A name gives you a way to refer to things you've previously computed.